Hey everyone, a little bit of a pre-word before we get into the video. This is the case for ZZ video that I mentioned in my other video, ZZ is Inevitable. Basically, this video is already outdated by the time I'm releasing it. I'm just releasing it because people wanted to see it. If you want to see an up-to-date version of this video that is a lot shorter, a lot more concise, and a lot more accurate, go check out my other video, ZZ is Inevitable. It'll be linked right in the description. Hey everybody, this is going to be a bit of a tough video. This is going to be a bit of a gritty one. But before we get into the real meat and bones of the video, I've got a bit of a preamble I want to get out of the way. Number one, the goal for this video is to dispel some common misinformation around methods and ZZ in particular, so that we can have better conversations about methods. The first piece of misinformation I'd like to dispel is the idea of EOLine. ZZ uses EOCross. The opinion of ZZers used to be pretty split between line and cross. Line even used to be winning, but since about 2018, the same year that the videos I'm going to be responding to came out, hey, I wonder if they help push it to the side. Cross has been the de facto way to do ZZ, EOCross, about 5 or 6 years now. As such, a decent chunk of my responses will be, EOCross fixes this. If you're interested in exactly how EOCross fixes this, go ahead and watch the video. The next thing I want to say is that speed is not necessarily a be-all end-all qualification. Just because somebody is faster doesn't mean that they're inherently correct, although it can provide you with better experiences through which you can form your opinion. For the record, for those interested, I global almost sub 9 on 3x3 at home, and I have sub 10 averages in comp. That's where I'm at, if it matters, which it shouldn't. So the format of this video, I'm going to be responding to 3 major videos, as well as having my own rant segments throughout. The videos that I'm going to be responding to are Perm's CFOP Ru ZZ comparison, Jayden McNeill's ZZ is objectively and measurably worse than CFOP, and Kian Mansour's Ru vs ZZ an objective comparison. So let's jump straight in on the Perm video.
But in ZZ, because of the EOLine step, you spend a lot of moves right at the start of the solve, barely solving anything, and therefore you have more places that you have to look at. So immediately that's a huge blow to ZZ's prospects. The next important aspect of look ahead is which blind spots have you solved. So for example, in CFOP, often how good solvers will begin their solves is with a cross as well as a planned back F2L pair. And once you have done this, then I talk about this a lot, but when you look at a corner and you find it, then you only need to find its edge, and that edge can be anywhere in the top or one of these two or here. So chances are just by looking from one side, you can see everything you need to see.
Right, so for the first time in my actual response, EOCross fixes this. How so? Well, let's start with look ahead. Obviously, EOCross and cross solve the same amount of pieces, the 4 D-layer edges. EOCross also orients every edge, and while this doesn't outright solve anything, it does mean that you need less information in order to find a pair, which also makes look ahead easier. With line, having EO solved is more of a necessity, right? It makes any amount of look ahead even remotely possible, it's required. But with cross, it's a luxury that you have. Secondly is blind spots. With the cross solved, the only true blind spot will be the back left slot where you can't see anything. The back right is a half blind slot because from here I can only see 1 sticker on each piece, but that can help with deduction. The only true complete blind spot is the back left pair. It's worth noting that in the time since Perm made this video, the inspection meta has changed. Top CFOPers are often planning cross plus 2, and a ZZ solver that would be as fast as them would be expected to be planning at least EOCross plus 1. What this means is that at the start of F2L, CFOP and ZZ will have very similar blind spots. So, on to our next point, which is about ergonomics and the grip you hold the cube in. Of course, you want to stay in home grip because it's the most comfortable and has the most possible things you can do comfortably afterwards.
With CFOP in general, you stay in this grip. And the reason for that is because anytime you move one of your hands up, then the cross edge moves up. And if you have to solve an F2L pair, that involves putting the cross edge back down at some point. And that ultimately restores you back to home grip. And so the important aspect of this is the cross edges on the left and right are already solved. And that is not true for Ru or ZZ.
But now it is.
So I've taken a random scramble from CS Timer and I've solved the EOCross so you guys can just watch ZZ F2L as it is with the EOCross, and you'll see it's nowhere near as regrippy as it was made out to be with EOLine. Although I did do a bit of a bad U prime there, that's a bad habit from me. Of course, this is a ridiculously small sample size, just one random scramble, so now I'm just going to get a few different random scrambles, solve the cross on them, and just sort of do F2L so you guys can take a look at that. But you'll see that it's nowhere near as bad, nowhere near as regrippy as Eoline was made out to be. So for ear cross and then nice. Accidental ear cross +1, I think.
And that's most of what I have to say for the Perm video. He does make a closing statement about how ear cross exists. He says that it fixes the ergo problem, but not much else, which I evidently disagree with. He also says that it is a nightmare to plan, and we're welcome to yell at him about that statement in the comments. Checkmate, Dylan, I'm yelling at you in a whole different video. But about planning ear cross, it's considered to be about the same difficulty as cross +1, which is something that Perm, as well as every other sane CFOP user, would recommend planning. I can't fault the man for struggling with ear cross though. The skill set is very different to cross +1, and it's a pretty high bar to clear for somebody who has no interest in actually maining the method. The skill sets are different, but the difficulty is about the same, so it would take about the same amount of time focusing on each. That concludes the Perm segment. I think we should do the big one now.
RUL block building. So, it can be good, or it can be awkward. Generally, it's awkward. So, the reason it's awkward is just to do a switching between, like, righty turning and then having to, like... I mean, I'm doing obnoxious regrips right now. I don't know why I haven't really cubed properly all day. But yeah, switching from RU stuff to LU stuff is generally annoying, and especially with overturning thrown into the mix for block building, it gets pretty ugly fast. Like with block building, you might have to do something, something like that with like an overturning where basically like the grip you start in will not be the grip you finish in, which is just annoying. And especially if you're switching between right hand and left hand with that happening at the same time, it can get really ugly, is my point.
I mostly want to jump on this point here regarding the RUL ergonomics. Of course, we previously established block building is gone, we use cross and pairs, but a lot of people seem to think that every pair, or a majority of pairs in a ZZ solve will be RUL. I tried to get some data for this, that unfortunately I don't have massive swaths of samples available, and they will be biased because they'll be reconstructed solves. I looked at over 100 of my own reconstructed solves, I think it was 120 something. Some of them were much higher quality solves than others because I don't just recon fast solves. I recon solves that are exceptionally fast, solves that are fun, solves that have a cool little thing about them. If I skip some last layer steps, I might recon that. So there will be some bias towards better solves, but it should be mitigated by the fact that I recon solves that get skips on last layer, so the F2L doesn't influence that. Again, the sample size isn't massive, but it's like 120 something solves. And the result that I got for my solves was that RUL pairs came out to about 27% of F2L pairs, so about a quarter of them. Meanwhile, 54%, so about twice as many, were just pure 2gen. Pure 2gen. 16% were RUD, LUD 3gen, and the rest were some goofy stuff. ZZ F2L is less RUL than most people think, and a lot more RU, RUD, LU, LUD.
And then the other thing I don't really like is EO line as a step, and this is just from seeing like all the fast ZZ solvers, and actually I'm not going to say that. But yeah, just from seeing ZZ solvers, EO line as a step, it kind of feels slower than CFOP cross, which makes sense because EO it has a lot more like planning involved, and as such it can take up a lot more of the 15 seconds of inspection to find that EO line as opposed to a CFOP cross, which I mean makes sense. But then when you realize that that step is slower, then in order for ZZ to probably be worth it, like taking LL out of account because it's such a small part of the solve at the high level, or I shouldn't necessarily say that, I just mean small in terms of time. But when you're comparing the fact that EO line is probably slower than cross, then RUL block building has to be faster than F2L, and I just don't think it is.
Solves are becoming so ridiculously fast, so optimized. I don't think we can afford to neglect any part of the solve. We do have to talk about last layer, I think. Of course, this point was first made about EO line, and now it has to be applied to EO cross. The best thing that I can do is provide what we know about Eocross, which is that it should be about 8.5 moves in speed solves, and we believe that for sub 6 solving, Eocross should be about 1.2, 1.3 seconds with pickup. So is Eocross slower than CFOP Cross? Absolutely. Yeah, no, definitely it is. So why would we do ZZ? It's a gambit. We're taking a slower cross so that we can have an F2L with different strengths and a guaranteed walnut glass layer that won't impede on our F2L. Front-loading EO into the cross step in a similar way to how Yao front-loads 3 cross edges into the center building step.
You have one thing in particular is you have really nasty blind spots. Like with F2L, like your bad blind spots are like these. I mean, if you're a righty dominant solver, like these is like a half blind spot. This is like a total blind spot, this pair. And then everything else, you know, these 4 cross edges, it's all Gucci.
Again, this has been covered in the J-Perm section. Entering F2L with Eocross, ZZ should have about the same amount of blind spots as F2L with the benefit of a simpler deduction to help out with what blind spots do remain. Moving on.
Another thing that's kind of annoying and just like generally terrible about ZZ is because block building has more quote-unquote cases, and when I say cases, I mean there's just more like variants of the situations you'll encounter when you're trying to solve blocks. Automation of solutions, automation of, how you solve cases, it becomes a huge issue, especially for things like look ahead and keeping your TPS up. Because if you've got all these cases, and I don't think it's realistic for someone to learn block building in a truly algorithmic manner, and because of that, look ahead is just naturally going to be a bit worse than it would be with CFOP, because it just becomes that much harder for you to do look ahead, like I described in my 99% of look ahead video Preamble, which you should definitely check out. It's a good video. But yeah, basically you see pieces, and when you're looking ahead, you want to see those pieces and you want to be able to like draw your attention to something else and solve them without even thinking about it. Just have muscle memory take over. Good luck getting muscle memory to take over with block building. I don't know if the Rogue users can really do it that well, and despite that they're still competing with CFOP, so there you go. So that causes issues, and then there's also TPS, because if you really want to try and let muscle memory take over and have that look-ahead mindset, you're almost definitely going to have to sacrifice TPS. Like, no matter what, it's either going to be look-ahead or TPS. There has to be some sort of sacrifice made. So that's the thing that's pretty sucky about ZZ, in my opinion.
And now, with Eocross, it's all Eocross. With Eocross, we jump from having a near unmanageable level of entropy to having half of the cases CFOP has on a pair-to-pair basis. But overall, F2L will have an even more drastic reduction. The overall bubble of F2L cases is massively reduced as each pair gets sliced in half. The reduced F2L cases, alongside ZBLL and having a lot of RUD, LUD pairs, has kind of crafted a robotic TPS spam identity for Eocross solving. Not unsimilar to what Meta and APB have tried to do, but with much less algorithms, actually.
Let's just say we're doing orange on front ZZ, and then this is our last pair, and we don't know how to do commutators because we suck at cubing and spend too much time on Reddit. Because you have the edge solved, when you have an edge solved, or even an edge in like... Actually, with ZZ, it's just whenever an edge is in another slot. So if you've got an edge in another slot like that, or like that, then you can rotate, and you can finish the solve as technically rotationless, but you did throw a rotation in there. So that is like an efficiency that could be added to ZZ. However, that would only work when you've already... Basically, there can't be any edges in the U layer that belong in F12, otherwise a rotation will unorient it. However, I don't think this is an efficiency ZZ users are willing to use because they think rotationless solving is like God to them or something.
Sane ZZ solvers do rotate for this. We're not crazy, we take time saves where we can get them, woohoo!
And the real last thing that I really don't like about ZZ, good luck being color neutral with any ZZ variant whatsoever. Color neutrality is a big deal. I'm sorry, it just is.
Alright, 2 things to say here. One is that a few ZZ solvers have been color neutral in the past, but most moved on from it. Not necessarily because it was too difficult to inspect for them, but because they felt like it was spreading their improvement too thin and they wanted to focus on something else, like Sign wanted to focus on learning ZBLL, or Kazura wanted to focus on switching his main event every 2 weeks, so most people pulled away from that. Secondly, most top CFOP solvers, even to this day, are dual color neutral, which ZZ usually also is with X2Y neutrality. Now, whether this is because dual colour neutrality is actually better, or because top cubers still haven't caught up to being colour neutral, that is debatable. But, as I record it, the year is 2024 and ZZ is keeping up to CFOP in terms of colour neutrality. Next argument, this one's a bit of a big one, it's going to be a bit of a long clip that I'm just going to let roll from Jayden, but it's important, to not take things out of context and snip up his words, I'll just let it roll.
So we'll talk about CFOP. It has the longest history by far. Eric Ackersdyke actually informed me a little earlier that it goes back to as early as 1981, although back then they were using CLL and ELL instead of OLL and PLL. But other than that, Cross and F12 were already an established method. So that method, CFOP, maybe the best method, but that method is nearly twice my age. So I'm 20 and CFOP is 38. That kind of blew my mind, honestly. It's nearly twice my age. Like, what the hell? That's kind of messed up. But yeah, so CFOP, I don't think I need to convince people that it's by far the most explored and developed and pushed method in the cubing meta. I feel like that kind of speaks for itself. Now for Roux, I'll talk a little bit about Roux. So it originated around about 2004. Mr. Roux from France, he posted like a website with the method. I think he uploaded some solves. And it did catch on. It's obviously not as popular as CFOP, but I don't think it's unpopular to the point where there's something untapped with the method that's going to like really change everything. I think it's been in circulation long enough, just like CFOP has, that we have like a 99.9% idea of like what high-level Roux probably looks like. Although I will have a ramble on that in the future, hopefully, about my thoughts on where Roux could head based on where CFOP is heading in terms of things like option select, which I don't think I've even talked about on this channel. Option select ramble coming soon, apparently. But yeah, that's like the history of Roux. And then ZZ, it's a little bit younger than Roux, not by that much. So the method website was published by Mr. ZZ in like 2006. So that means it's been online for over a decade. And then there was also a Polish cuber who posted a thread on, pardon me, Polish speedcubing forum of some description that I think helped popularize the method more than it already had been. So if we count the start of ZZ as 2008 instead of 2006, it has still been in circulation for a decade, and we have had semi-prominent cubers using the method, or at the very least we've seen people using the method and, getting sub 10-ish. So, like with Roux and like with CFOP, maybe to a slightly lesser extent, but nonetheless, it has been in circulation long enough that there is a very good chance that we know, I'd say like at least 90% of like what ZZ is capable of, and I really just doubt there's any like untapped thing that we just haven't figured out is like really, really fast.
And you know what? I agree, in a way. I don't think we're going to find anything new, but I also don't think the method has been pushed nearly as much as it ought to have been. One of the biggest issues with ZZ is that it has had a very misguided history. Exactly why this is, I could argue all day long. Maybe it's because edge orientation acts as a barrier, so a lot of the ZZ solvers that get involved were more interested in the theory than practicing. Maybe it's because of some of ZZ's old marketing, advertising the method with the benefit of not needing to learn full OLL is more likely to draw in people that want to be lazy and find shortcuts than actually improve. The whole EOLine issue, we used EOLine because we thought EOCross would be difficult. Long story short, the history of ZZ is largely that of barking up the wrong tree and cutting corners instead of actually trying to get better. At least the first decade being spent with EOLine and quirky last layer ideas like phasing and the missing link, early corner permutation, ZZCT, whoever would fall for that. That's not to say that CFOP and Roux hasn't had bad ideas as well. MGLS, Pinkie Pie, those were things that existed. But those ideas, I think they were a lot more niche to their methods, whereas ZZ has gone through era after era of trying silly, stupid ideas, and we have a lot harder of a time leaving them behind. It took us like a decade and a half to decide that EOCross with ZBLL was in fact the correct way to solve. All this time wasted on bad stuff means less time and less effort spent actually pushing the method forward, which is what we've needed to be doing, which is what we weren't doing. After this, Jayden spends a little while talking about the fastest ZZ solver in competitions, which at the time was Hyun, a CFOPper who used ZZ with EOCross to practice his turning. Jayden's little ramble ends with this clip.
What variant does Hyun News. Well, he uses EOCross. Yay! Much more basic than block building, but more effective. Ain't that great? Ain't that more good news? Just like knowing your method is good for feet.
Yes, Jayden. It is good news. I mean, that was the point you were making earlier, wasn't it? With the automation of solutions and the block building. Simple is better. More effective is better. Simple and more effective is much better. Yeah, this is a good thing. Alright. So I've made a lot of counter-arguments, and I've dispelled a lot of mostly outdated information. I haven't really made too many points of my own. I believe that ZZ with EOCross can find its place in the modern cubing landscape. As most top CFOP solvers learn large chunks of ZBLL, I think the consistency that ZZ affords you with a guaranteed ZBLL case can now be viewed as a positive. It's no longer that you have to learn ZBLL to make the method work. You now get to do ZBLL every solve. People are learning large amounts of that alg set anyway, you might as well get the most out of it. Besides that, I also just want to push for better debates around ZZ. Too many times I've just been sent a link to Jayden's video and that just closes the conversation. I believe that the most accurate comparison that we can make between ZZ and CFOP at about a sub 6 level would likely be Cross plus 2, CFOP F2L, last layer, versus EOCross plus 1, ZZ F2L, and ZBLL. Now, the argument becomes this. Is solving two CFOP pairs, which could be perfectly fine, like 2 Gen RU both of them, or could be RULD FY kitchen sink Gen F2L pairs, is two possibly kitchen sink CFOP pairs, likely with some EO influencing, into a last layer that might be 1 look, might be 2 looks. Is that consistently better than 3 RULD Gen F2L pairs into a 1 look last layer every time? Or, how about this? Is it comparable? Is it close? I think that as we go forward, the way that we think about methods will change from comparing individual methods to comparing styles. Layer methods versus block methods. In this vein, EOCross plus 1, 3 ZZF2L pairs, and ZBLL just needs to be comparable with Cross plus 2, 2 CFOP pairs, and a 1.5 look last layer. If these things are around equal, then what we have is a stylistic choice. Do you, the solver, prefer one or the other? If they're around the same speed, but one of them clicks for you more, makes more sense, that's surely the better choice. Now, you might be thinking that with both methods looking quite similar at the top level in the near future, why would somebody use ZZ instead of sticking to the more proven CFOP? Hey, good point. Counter question. Why not both? If they become so similar in fact, then you could use ZZ when there's an easy EOCross, CFOP when there's a lot of stuff solved that you want to preserve without having to worry about EO. Hey, you can keep your previous bias. Maybe you preferred ZZ but you want to delve into CFOP when it's obviously better, or vice versa. I don't think this is some crazy, unrealistic, utopian method neutrality stuff. The issue with stuff like being neutral between CFOP and Rogue is that what's good for both of those methods in inspection is rather the same, and doing deep inspection for both is difficult because they're very different. CFOP and ZZ, if they are so similar, they almost act like offshoots and stylistic differences of each other, and I'm sure you can manage both. If they are so similar that they become different styles of layer method solving, why not be competent at both so you can just pull one out of your back pocket when you need to? So, if ZZ becomes a style of layer solving, it has to square up with Ru.
First block is similar to the left block of ZZ. So here we go, FB equals left block. And the reason for this is because you don't want to be switching RU to LU or vice versa in ZZ. Why am I writing my Z's like that? I don't even do that. Okay, whatever. You don't want to be switching from RU to LU in ZZ that often because it's awkward. Also, it loses some efficiency. So most ZZ solvers say to build one block and then the other one. So with that logic, first block and second block are directly comparable to left block and right block in ZZ.
Okay, quick interjection. I have no idea who would have said that. Myself being friends with some ZZers who have been around since the older Eoline days, Papa Smurf, Jen, they also don't know where this idea came from. The objective of Eoline is to be as efficient as possible, so you just build whatever you can that would be efficient. You're not restricted to doing one full block at a time. So I mean 2 points really. First of all, no EO cross, not Eoline. Secondly, this is an inaccurate comparison even for Eoline.
Also, after you're done block building, last 10 pieces, which is CMLL plus LSC, is comparable to ZBLL because it's just the finish. After you're done blocks, you just do one of these steps depending on your method, and then you finish. And the last comparable steps are, Eoline. We ran out of steps for Rue. What is this garbage? Eoline is garbage.
What? Last 10 pieces is 2 steps, CMLL and LSC, one of which is usually broken into 2 sub-steps, EOLR and 4C. Altogether, that solves 10 pieces. Comparing that to ZBLL, which is just 1 step and solves 8 pieces, do not say it solves 9, the center is already solved, it solves 8. That seems a bit weird, no? Look, I admit last 10 pieces is a fantastic way to end a solve. Rue is low-key just the best method. But comparing last 10 pieces in its entirety to just ZBLL, I think that's pushing it. And about now, I should disclose this isn't just my opinion. There was a conversation a few years ago, I put this off for multiple years, about Kian's comparison to ZZ. I'm not the most well-versed with Rue, it's easily my worst of the big 4 methods. Luckily, this conversation included a few people who are pretty okay at the method, so I feel comfortable bringing their takes into the video. There is a caveat here, I'll loop back to that in a second. Also, do not worry about reading all of this if you don't want to. I will loop back and narrate the more important parts later on. The bread and butter of Kian's argument comes from this comparison here. Of course, Eoline comparison, hardy-ha, whatever. With the idea that both blocks are done separately, Kian puts them both at 1.6 seconds and ZBLL at 2.2 seconds. He then summarizes that in order to reach the same average as Kian, you'd have to have a 0.6 Eoline. First of all, let's take a little look at this as if we were doing Eoline. Of course, once one block is done, you no longer need to move pieces from like the bottom left over into the bottom right or vice versa. The second block should be quicker than the first one. There is an efficiency trade-off, it'll take more moves, but it should be quicker than the first one. Coda, Farmi and Error in their brainstorming came out to the number 1.4 for the second block, so let's roll with that. Now let's move back to something. Because the message from Coda and Farmi was 2 years old, I reached out to them to make sure they still agree with everything that they said. Coda still agreed. Farmi had something new to say. Quote, "People are getting faster nowadays, so I don't really feel as confident on the ZBLL statement because kids are learning ZBLL just like it's PLL nowadays. Maybe ZBLL could be faster than 2.2. So, we bring right block down to 1.4 and ZBLL to 2 seconds flat. Suddenly, we've now got over a second for Eoline. But that's not what we're here for. We're here for the EO cross debate. So, previously we've mentioned that EO cross should be 1.2 with pickup for a sub-6 solver, and if we take the 2.0 ZBLL number, then we have 3.2 seconds with just ZZF2L left. Assuming that we plan the first pair, can we solve 4 ZZF2L pairs in 2.8 seconds? 0.7 seconds per pair. Well, that averages out to just a little bit under 10 TPS over the F2L step, so I think, yeah, actually we can. Top CFOP solvers are hitting like 9, 10, 11, sometimes 12 TPS in F2L, so yeah, we can. If we're comparing methods, we have to talk about the top level of solving. And at the top level of solving, large or full amounts of ZBLL are becoming more and more commonplace. An argument that I see a lot is that CFOP now uses a lot of EO control and a lot of ZBLS or just intuitive EO control throughout the course of the entire F2L to force ZBLL more often than you would get, just doing sledge and regular insert, for example. I'll warn you now, arguing at this point requires a lot of hypotheticals and it's a bit nitty gritty, so if you're going to struggle with that, this isn't going to be a favourite part of the video. Now, it's very difficult to quantify doing small amounts of intuitive edge control, so let's fully commit to it. Go on with edge control. If ZZ gets the comfort of a consistent one-look last layer with ZBLL, let's allow CFOP the same. Alright, let's say CFOP's also doing ZBLL, and you're going to use ZBLS to get there every single time. Now, obviously you're not going to use full ZBLS, it's to the user's discretion how much you use, And you can avoid some cases with intuitive edge control, trying to make sure you don't get like a, you know, 0 oriented. Or 4 misoriented, sorry, because you'll have 5 edges. Now, I'm not going to sift through a 302 algorithm set to decide which ones I'll use, just to never use them myself. So I'm going to commit a complete cardinal sin and just cut out an arbitrary number of cases. Let's say 10%. Let's say you don't use 10% of ZBLS. So now 302 algorithms becomes 272. For just one slot. If you want to do it more consistently, you'll either have to force a rotation on 3/4 of your solves or mirror it. I'm going to argue against both of those cases actually. The first case being 272 algorithms and a rotation, the other being that you learn ZBLS again into another slot, then either mirror or rotate for the others, likely front right and back right ZBLS I would imagine. So that would result in learning an additional 272 or 544 algorithms for CFOP on top of already learning ZBLL for CFOP. But if we're learning more algs for the CFOP method, then we should be fair and we should allocate those algs to ZZ as well, because you don't just know them, they take time to learn and practice and upkeep, and if we're going to give you that extra practice time for CFOP, we should be fair, give it to ZZ as well. So what would you learn with all of those extra algs for ZZ? We've already learned ZBLL. We can start with 3 sets that are pretty well developed. TTLL, TTLL Plus, and TTLL minus. For those of you out of the loop, they're basically one last lot, last layer sets for particular OLS cases. So this one is TTLL, it's when you have the edge solved and all corners oriented, and then you have similar ones where the corner in the slot is misoriented and the corner that belongs in the slot is misoriented. Those are the plus and minus cases. Now, keep in mind, these two are the same F2L case here, but this one isn't TTLL, or TTLL plus or TTLL minus. This is just an F2L case, and this one's TTLL because all of the corner orientation matters, even for the last layer. Just so that you know what those are, keeping you in the loop. So, we could learn all of those sets that allow us to solve the last layer and the F2L pair at the same time. Whenever you get those cases, they're 72 algs each, and the alg quality is comparable to about mid-table ZBLLs. So they basically allow us to skip last slot whenever we get them. It's rare that they'll show up naturally, but for each set, there's also about 27 other cases where you can set up to these alg sets in 3 moves. What I mean by case is a F2L pair and also last layer corner orientation. So there would be 504 cases. These are OLS cases for last slot, and with 27 of them will be an easy 3-move setup into one of these, which will then allow you to solve everything. What this means is you effectively have a 1 out of 20 chance to get one of these cases where you can effectively skip an F2L pair or force the equivalent of a 3-mover. Now that comes up to 216 algs, with all those setups being intuitive. So depending on what ZBLS hypothetical we're engaging with, we either have 56 or 328 algs left to play with. What else do we learn? Let's stick with that same idea of ending the solve at the last pair. We can learn last 5 edge permutation. Say we get to the last slot and all 5 corners are solved. So solve the edges. That's 12 algs for one slot, and we could just mirror them out to the rest of the slots, but we actually have room to learn new algs. 4 of the cases are trivial to mirror anyways, they're just easy edge commutators. So it only needs to be 8 algs per new slot, for a total of 36 algs for slot neutral last 5 edge permutation. So we still have between 20 and 292 spare algorithms to learn. So if you just have 20 algs left, probably just fill those up with the most useful OLS cases. Notice how I said not the best, but the most useful. The best cases are cancels into soons and into TUL algs, which will have fantastic ZBLL sets, so you're better off taking the ZBLL. What you want to do is find the kind of nice OLS cases that give you the most bang for your buck. Maybe they'd give you a H or a pi, do those. But what do we do if we have 292 spare algs? We've already learned ZBLL, TTLL plus, TTLL minus, TTLL, last 5 edge permutation. We've got the setups into all those. What do? We still have 292 algs to learn, and the practice time and the upkeep time it would take to learn nearly 300 algs. We could do multi-slotting. We could do multi-slotting for last 2 edges on right block, that's 6 algs. We could do last 2 corners on right block if we happen to get both the edges solved. That's 70 algs. We still have over 200 spare algs to play with. Look, my point is that if you allow CFOP a strong amount of EO control, a really large amount of EO control with a lot of ZBLS, you turn ZZ with the same amount of out of solve practice time, with the same amount of algorithms allocated to it, into a fucking super method. Like, the amount of cube states where you can just end the solve. Just end the solve, or just skip something. It's crazy, it's crazy. And I can't be bothered to, like, finish wrapping it up, because obviously I made a better video called ZZ is Inevitable. Go and watch that instead.